Welcome to this house of memory and celebration. Welcome to all who have sometimes found reason to be insufficient to explain love, grief, awe, or why the moon sometimes breaks your heart. We gather not to explain the world, but to listen to it more deeply. We gather to descend beneath the floorboards of certainty into the cellars of symbols where old stories hum and unfinished longings whisper. Here we bless imagination, that unruly faculty that refuses to stay in its lane, that crosses borders without a passport, that smuggles truth past the guards of propriety. As the poet Adrian Rich said, poems are like dreams. In them you put what you don't know you know. Let us worship in that not knowing. Let us trust what sings before it explains. Let us open ourselves to the mysteries of the poetic attention.
For the meditation, I have a poem by the poet Kim Stafford, the son of William Stafford, who has been writing a poem a day since his father died, in honor of his father. Kim is also a wonderful poet. So this is a recent poem, and you might relax and think about this. It's called Interviewing the Soul. You might think about that part of yourself that you don't usually listen to, the part where your creativity lies, where that still small voice that might take a different perspective, that might stop to see things that your busyness you might not look at. This is called Interviewing the Soul by Kim Stafford. Have I honored you? Have I heard you? Have I fed you beauty as well as pain? The hut I built for you above the sea, with a table for thought, a bed for rest, has it given you sanctuary? I have grown old while you are still young. Strange that we've lived so far apart. The letters I've sent came back no forwarding address. What have you kept from me? Can you invite me into your silences? That time at sunset, after catastrophe, brought me to my knees, as a lone crow flew over calling my name. Who was I, if not you?
Long before arguments, there are images. Long before doctrines, there are stories. Long before theology, there is a rhythm tapping insistently from inside the rib cage saying, pay attention. Whenever the soul wants to grow, it starts speaking in riddles. Poetry is a form of language that concentrates experience. It gathers feeling, image, rhythm, silences, and intuition into a small verbal space that allows meaning to arise through resonance and association. Allen Ginsberg describes poetry as maximum information, minimum number of syllables. Poetry relies on compression. It asks a few words to carry more than their share of meaning. The reader is invited to participate in completing the experience. This is why poems are often reread again and again. They grow deeper as the reader matures. Emily Dickinson described its effect with some precision. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that it is poetry. All right, an example, a poem. Morning by Krista Lucas. The stillness, the radio's news, the scent of rain, my neighbor bending to pick up his newspaper in his orange plastic bag tossed on the step. The cars, all heading this way and that, a fine spray beneath their wheels, vapor rising from the sidewalks, and the light of the eastern sun slanting long, as if there's all the time in the world. Okay, the phone rings. A poet friend, he asks, do you ever get shooting pains like someone's got a voodoo doll of you, they're stabbing with a long needle again and again? And I said, no. Long pause. Now the poet friend is sounding concerned and says, how about now? Poetry is crossing the border between the known and the forbidden, between the socially acceptable and the secretly necessary. That is why every culture, before it writes laws, builds mythology, the invisible substructure of shared reality. So, the poetic imagination reveals the underpinnings of culture and identity. It is the deep workings of how meaning forms itself. Or as the poet Anne Sexton put it with her signature grace and mischief, poetry isn't something to be ashamed of, it's the way we survive our secrets. Poetry matters because it opens us to inner experience. It speaks to feelings, tensions, meanings that shape our lives long before we have any way to explain them. Poetry is one of the main ways hidden knowledge joins the conversations. Dreams do this at night. Poetry does it in the daylight, sometimes brusquely, sometimes beautifully, often without asking permission. Poetry helps us stay aware of lived experience, grief, desire, awe, fear, joy, contradiction. And that strange feeling you get at 3:14 a.m. when you suddenly understand your childhood and then immediately forget it. Awareness is essential for health. Anything excluded tends to reappear through symptoms, projections, and family arguments at holiday gatherings. Anne Sexton addressed this with characteristic bluntness. Poetry is the way we help ourselves. I had that in here twice, so I'll have to speak to the editor. Poets are specialists in staying with questions. They resist the temptation to wrap things up neatly. Mary Oliver offered a simple, irritatingly wise instruction: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. This fits with Unitarian Universalist theology, which trusts experience, honors plural ways of knowing, and assumes revelation is still ongoing, often arriving late through metaphor when no one is looking, or at least looking particularly dignified. Poetry does not serve doctrine. It serves the slow, imperfect process of becoming more fully ourselves. It supports that work by holding contradictions long enough for new insight to emerge. Robert Frost joked, a poem is a momentary stay against confusion, only momentary. In practice, this means that a few lines of a poem can reveal what hours of explanation cannot. Poetry rebalances the inner world. It allows instinct and intellect to share a cup of tea without arguing about who's in charge. This again aligns with you thinking, a tradition that refuses to reduce truth to a single register of language. We affirm reason, but we also honor experience, mystery, personal meaning, and the ongoing revelation that arrives through story, symbol, and song. Poetry slows the moment so we can find that space where opposites converge and a larger sense of self emerges. Okay, one poem you've probably heard before. I dug, you dug, he dug, she dug, we all dug. Yeah, it's not great poetry, but it's deep. I know if you're groaning, you're paying attention. A poem does not solve you. It holds you long enough for a wiser version of yourself to arrive quietly. From Mary Oliver, that gentle, fierce priestess of attention, you only have to let the soft animal of your body know what it knows. The imagination, that profound and wild companion, is how we remember that we are more than what we can explain. Okay, reading poetry. Reading poetry with care is a spiritual discipline because it trains attention. Poetry slows experience down to speed our concentration. Close reading is about presence. It asks the reader to stay with a few words long enough for something to unfold. The poet Billy Collins gives famously impractical advice here. He suggests taking a poem and walking around inside it, as if it were a room, looking around slowly, touching the furniture, judging the lighting. A poem offers imagery, something in the reader responds, and meaning arises in the space in between. This is why the same poem can feel entirely different at different stages of life. The poem has not changed. The reader has. Mary Oliver encourages readers to trust this process. Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. This applies equally to poems that confuse us, the poems we reread obsessively for reasons we cannot explain to friends. Close reading requires patience. Pay attention to sound. Notice where your body responds. Observe what irritates you, especially what irritates you. Poets are very helpful with irritation. As Emily Dickinson once advised, tell the truth, but tell it slant. A poem rarely says, here is the lesson. It says, stand here, look this way. Carl Jung emphasized that growth occurs when conflicting perspectives or moods are held in awareness without repression or being forced to collapse into one another. A poem is an ideal container for that kind of holding. As poet Sharon Olds puts it plainly, poetry is where we stand long enough to feel. So maybe the meaning of a poem's life is to make us feel things we really did not want to feel. There is something quietly democratic about reading poetry. You do not need permission. You do not need expertise. Robert Frost once observed, poetry begins in delight and ends in wisdom. For Unitarian Universalists, this contemplative approach suits our thinking. We trust experience. We do not rush closure. We remain open to ongoing revelation. Poetry does not ask us to believe anything. It asks us to stay. And in staying, something subtle and strengthening takes place. Attention deepens, experience integrates, and subtle stirrings grow more articulate.
A poem that illustrates some of what Jonathan has been saying by Rainer Maria Rilke. It's called You Darkness, of Whom I Am Born. You, darkness, of whom I am born, I love you more than the flame that limits the world to the circle it illuminates and excludes all the rest. But the darkness embraces everything, shapes and shadows, creatures and me, people, nations, just as they are. It lets me imagine a great presence stirring beside me. I believe in the night. So, as a kind of listening, hearing the many parts of our experience, including the dark, Jonathan quoted Mary Oliver about paying attention to the parts we don't usually pay attention to, the parts of our experience that we try and exclude, that we try not to own. Writing and reading poetry can help us to pay attention, to connect to those places where we have become disconnected, maybe through survival, maybe through convenience, maybe through cultural rules and conditioning or family rules. But writing and reading poetry can be a form of listening to what we don't usually pay attention to. Finding the voices that we need that we might have excluded or lost somewhere along the way early in life through trauma or through later traumas that we've cut ourselves off from to survive. Bit by bit, in reading and metaphor, we can find a way back into those forgotten places and claim all of them. I want to read a piece that I wrote, and in this kind of writing, we talk about listening to the unconscious, to the part that we don't usually listen to. In writing, we can do that by starting wherever we are right now and then following the thread where it leads. So you don't even know where it's going to go, and that's how you connect to something important that might have wanted to be heard. Excuse me. So this piece I wrote starting with the idea, it was actually a prompt in a writing group on suffering was the prompt. The piece is called Monty Blue and Te Amo. Do we pay for life with suffering? Is the price of seeing juncos skip across my balcony and the hummingbirds every day outside my window, the knowledge that life is fleeting? Perhaps it is because I knew too deeply, too soon, the uncertainty of life and the certainty of death. But I would step back from living during my 20s. Life had lost its color. It was only my cat who brought warmth, who got me, Monty, a silver fluff, but not a frivolous cat, a serious being. We grieved together when the lovely and loving orange tabby, Te Amo, was killed by dogs. Te Amo, who lived up to his name, lived to love 24/7, to cuddle and talk to me with his paws massaging the soft stool where he sat next to me, purring and answering my conversation with a variety of meows. Companions since kittens, they washed each other, cuddled and slept together. Though throughout the day, Monty would be out on the farm on a mission, marking his territory, catching butterflies, catching gophers, serious cat business. Te Amo stayed inside with me, looking for the next touch, talk, or involvement in whatever I did. When he was 2.5, he was gone. Monty stayed curled up on my bed with me, never went outside. For 3 days, we stayed on the bed and grieved together. After that, Monty took over the responsibility for loving me, keeping track of my emotional needs, following me around the house meowing until I noticed and said, "What's wrong with you?" Then I would realize it was me that was disturbed, running from some pain. And Monty was telling me to stop. Then I would hold him and cry. Lately, Monty has been showing up in my dreams, as if to remind me I've gotten too far away from my sadness, and to remind me it's okay to live. So there is a way that we can reconnect when we just follow a thread, follow the creative imagination, and tell our truth without judgment. We come to that part of ourself that's less judging of our experience and can hold it all. That we can find a voice for the parts of ourselves that are difficult to express through metaphor, through creative expression, through following something we don't know. Poetry is a great voice for the oppressed, for when we're going through difficult times, we can find company in the voices of others going through those things. It's been a great thing that we have turned to during these difficult times that we're all experiencing in our country. It's a healing force for diversity, for people whose voices are silenced, to find their voice, to speak their truths. I want to read a piece by a writer named Francisco X. Alarcón, translated by Francisco Aragon. It's called Prayer, Oración. I want a God as my accomplice, who spends nights in houses of ill repute and gets up late on Saturdays. A God who whistles through the streets and trembles before the lips of his lover. A God who waits in line at the entrance of movie houses and likes to drink café au lait. A God who spits blood from tuberculosis and doesn't even have enough for bus fare. A God knocked unconscious by the billy club of a policeman at a demonstration. A God who pisses out of fear before the flaring electrodes of torture. A God who hurts to the last bone, bites the air in pain. A jobless God, a striking God, a hungry God, a fugitive God, an exiled God, an enraged God. A God who longs from jail for a change in the order of things. I want a more godlike God. That's Francisco Alarcón. And the voices of the voiceless are what often gets expressed in poetry. And it has healed many people to find those voices. Even from prison, the poet Jimmy Santiago Baca was able to find a voice and become a poet and teach others to write. And he still works with others, and he's a wonderful poet. I want to read another piece by a poet named George Bilger. It's called Reichstag. It has a quote at the beginning: "Our children remind us that we all begin life as poets, attentive to the tiniest of the world's beauties. My little boy and I are standing in front of the Reichstag, which is burning and coalescing with rich and complicating history right there in front of us. But he doesn't particularly care. In fact, he's not even looking at the damn thing, having focused all his intention instead on a tiny, intricately tattooed black and red beetle at his feet. A firebug, he says. And I know he's right, because we looked it up online last week. You see them all the time here in Berlin, or at least he does. And there is really nothing more exciting for him, at least at the moment, than to see a firebug moving through the grass. And I know that the firebug era will soon come to an end, to be replaced by the getting stoned and drunk and calling me from jail era, to be followed by the buying his first condom era, which in time will lead to the moving into his own place era, which I fear because my own ice age is not that far off, and I will not roam the earth much longer, huge and carnivorous and terrifying, frightening smaller creatures with my roar, lowering my great bulk to kneel alongside a small boy, to watch the firebug, inscribed with its ancient and inscrutable hieroglyphics, crawl past us in front of some old building. So, hearing a poem can take us all into different parts of our experience, can remind us of things, can remind us of time. One of the things that poetry does is help us notice time. All poems, when we write them, when we hear them, are in some way elegiac. They are a miracle of time. They are a miracle of coming into presence, of finding our own meaning for our own life in the present, in the parts that we might not have paid attention to. As Jung said, it's the making of metaphor that can bring transformation. When the unconscious material is given language, and there's a lot of research that supports how this happens, but we don't have to know the research, we can experience it. Just read a poem, write something, take a few minutes, write about today, write about how it was before. I want to read a piece by wonderful local poet, Laurent Baudelaire. It's called Leaving It There. I stop weeding, stand still a while, hands on hips, because it's back again, that feeling of elation tangled with grief. Behind me, the lavender is zealous with bees. The lilac I planted long ago no longer needs the stake I hammered deep in the ground. But I leave it there, hidden in all that green. From downhill, children's laughter in the schoolyard. The breeze sings with this. I clean dirt from under my old ring and remember how the man I love pulled it out of his shirt pocket like a magic trick he performed only for me. The ring is dented, thinner, not quite round anymore. We have learned to age peacefully together now, without him. So that way of bridging time. There's also in poems a space for your own experiences to be held, to connect to something important. And when you do that, you can maybe write something of your own stories. It's important to find our stories, even from long ago. So I just want to read one more piece, and this one is one more by me about some of my story. It's called Mom's Stories. Listening to Mom telling stories at the dinner table after eating, I would get sleepy and lean over and lay my head in her lap. She continued eating, talking and laughing, threatening to drop lettuce in my ear, maybe to make light of how much it meant to her to suddenly become a mother at 40 of 10 and 11-year-old girls, to make light of how automatically we were like a real family, to make light of how much we needed each other. I needed her stories, even if they were mostly of hard times she endured growing up in a log cabin with cracks in the walls in Minnesota. There was not enough to eat. When she was a baby, there was no milk, and they would give her a sugar tip to suck on, a piece of cloth tied over a bit of sugar and dipped in milk. I could see her, a skinny baby with their same face and her light brown curls, sucking on a calico remnant. Stories about how she and her sister sang duets in the church where her father was the preacher, how hellfire stern he was, and all the taboos of the Nazarene religion. It was as if her life was imprinting on me, as if I had lived it too, as if her stories were my stories. The sternness of my own Catholic Graham, whom Mom never knew, merging with her equally punitive preacher father.
They said I wouldn't be any good at poetry because I'm dyslexic, but I'm doing fine. I've made 2 pots and a vase. As a joke, I'm not dyslexic. The only way I could throw a pot is into the trash can. But writing poetry is less like building a cathedral and more like leaving ourselves sticky notes from what we barely glimpse. Some of them say, call your mother. Some say, this still hurts. Some say, why are you like this? All of them are worth reading. Poems do not require completion. They require honesty and a pen willing to misbehave. If the poem makes no sense, congratulations, you're probably doing it right. I'm going to end with this poem by Simon Armitage. It's called The Shout. We went out into the schoolyard together, me and the boy whose name and face I don't remember. We were testing the range of the human voice. He had to shout for all he was worth. I had to raise an arm from across the divide to signal back that the sound had carried. He called from over the park. I lifted an arm, out of bounds. He yelled from the end of the road, from the foot of the hill, from beyond the lookout post of Fretwell's farm. I lifted an arm. He left town, went on to be 20 years departed from something that went wrong in Western Australia. Boy with the name and face I don't remember, you can stop shouting now. I can still hear you. Takeaway action steps. I have 5. Read one poem slowly this week. Choose a single poem. Read it aloud at least twice. Notice where your body responds. Write down one image that stays with you. Keep a poetic noticing journal. Once a day, jot down one vivid image, phrase, or sensory detail from your day. No interpretation. This trains attention and honors lived experience. Bring poetry into congregational life. Share a short poem at the beginning of a meeting or gathering. Notice how it shapes tone, attention, and emotional range. 4, use poetry to engage social justice work. Read poems by voices directly affected by injustice, especially poets from marginalized communities. Let lived experience inform compassion before making strategy. And finally, create a small ritual of imagination. Once a week, light a candle, read a poem, or write a few lines as an act of spiritual self-care. Namaste, blessed be, and so it goes.